Alan, we're here at the wastewater treatment works here in Mountfield, and I know this particular place has special significance for you. Do you want to share with us why so?
Well, I've driven past this place, I suppose, for the last 40 years, up and down the road, and maybe within 3 months, just after the Provisional IRA pulled up at this entrance. Now, this whole thing has all changed dramatically at that point, but they pulled up at this entrance, got out of their car and walked in through the gate and called out my father's name, Thomas Irwin, as far as I can, and shot him at close range. So that's 40 years now, coming on the 26th of March 1986 that happened. And so that's how this, I suppose, being here now on the 40th anniversary is a key thing that I just felt I needed to do. As I said, about 3 months afterwards, I came past this gate on my way to an orange service up in Mountfield Parish Church, and I suppose I did that annually each year as a kind of my way of paying tribute to him, even though I wasn't here. But this is the first time I've actually stopped at the entrance in the last 40 years in coming here, you know.
And Alan, your daddy obviously worked here. Do you want to give us a little sense of what it was exactly that he was doing, as much as you can understand?
Well, he did quite a run of treatment works right across here, and he would have came from here, from Carrickmore treatment works, Loch McGrory, then here to Mountfield, and at that stage there was really only a large tank, treatment tank there, and a bigger one there. There was very little else. This has all dramatically changed in this last year or two from what it was at that point, and he would have really been down a manhole service in the manhole just to make sure that things was functioning and things was moving, and sometimes they would have had to turn valves or change valves just to make the thing function in the way that it needed. So apparently he was seemingly down one of those service manholes when they called out his name, you know, and shot him. And to be, you know, there was nothing heroic in what they did, not one iota, because to walk in broad daylight and a busy road not that far away and shoot somebody, unarmed person with no way of defence, there's nothing heroic in that, nothing whatsoever. To me, that's all the hallmarks of someone who's driven by fear, you know, cowards, just driven by pure fear of anything that has any semblance of a British connection to it, and that's how it is. And to be honest, there's no glory in it either, and those who continue to glorify acts of terrorism and violence, they just bring shame on themselves. You know, it's a shameful act.
And Alan, it strikes me as well that this would have been, you know, quite tough physical work, especially in, you know, the wintry sort of months. But your daddy also obviously fulfilled the role of a part-time UDR soldier, so it can only but imagine he needed to be very good with his timekeeping in order to get everything done, and it wouldn't have been simple either within the home, I'm quite guessing, without your daddy there a lot of the time.
No, it wasn't. When at that time the DOE was using you had to be at a certain place at a certain time and do certain things at a certain time, so all that had to be done. And when Dad was on the part-time UDR, he was out at night, so he would always have been into work the next day on time. He would have never have left it late, because I would always have brought attention to it. And I know some people said, why wasn't he carrying a PPE, but he was always afraid of, one, dropping it into maybe a manhole or into a tank and not being able to retrieve it, or being overpowered by those that were working with him. And that's one thing he could never have lived with, if they used it on him and then would use it on someone else. So it was quite difficult. I know the morning that Dad went to work, you know, he had been told the evening before, from my memory, that there was a threat on the lives of security personnel, and by his way of talking, that he was one of those. He always assumed it would be Carrickmore because they spent an hour here, and then it came here. And I think I suppose for us, just having that conversation around the table that morning about what would need to be done or what would have to be done, but it hasn't been easy, and there's no way of saying it has been easy, since it's been difficult, and it's been a test of wills at times, and there's no doubt your life changes, and not just mum's life, but the entire family life changes. And I suppose then there was no real counselling, there was nothing in those early years. You got on with it, you dealt with it yourself.
Yeah. And Alan, of course, the extended family, you had already, in many ways, maybe in a less direct but an indirect way, had suffered it as well with your uncle Fred, only a matter of 7 years earlier, isn't that right?
Just 7 years in October 79, yeah. But we did, and Fred was very much... Fred and Dad, whilst there was a difference in their ages, were very close, and I know my mum and my late aunt, Fred's wife, were always very close over those. So, you know, once a fortnight, he'd have been in our house or we'd have been in their house, you know, so we were always very close to that road, and that did have a drastic effect, not just on us as nephews, but on my father too. Like, my father really struggled with that, you know, and he had to go at that time till clear out the car immediately afterwards and identify the body, and that always stuck with him, you know. And that, you know, you left with that and he was trying to be supportive to her and to them, the family, as best you can, because you don't understand what they're going through. You just have your own emotions and you're almost afraid to speak about it or talk about it, and that's not the helpful thing at those times.
And Alan, something else that strikes me too is this issue of those whom carried out that heinous murder would suggest that this was war, but yet a man was murdered when he was at his place of work carrying out a service on behalf of the full community.
Yeah.
There was no distinction in terms of this work with whom the beneficiaries were, and that must also be very, very difficult to understand and to comprehend as you were growing up, how that could be.
There's no doubt, you know, one thing I need to be very clear on, this was no war. This was just a dirty sectarian campaign of sadistic murders that had no thought or care. You know, I just think about it in the sense that Dad, you know, worked with everybody, dealt with everybody. We were brought up to respect everybody. We may have differences, whether those differences were religious or political, so be it. You just got on with it, you know. And what really galls me, I suppose, or really sickens me to the pit of my stomach is when I hear, you know, terrorists and even their families claiming that their human rights have been violated. And I'm saying, well, what about my father's human rights and my uncle and so many countless others that weren't even given an opportunity to life, that gunned down and unarmed, and the many bombs that they planted in darkness and behind balaclavas and hedges and ditches to do that? Like, what about their human rights? Men, women and children, like, you know, they knew rightly what they were doing. And it was just to destroy life and to pursue some twisted mythological, historical narrative that had no basis in truth.
And Alan, just finally, obviously we're very conscious that milestone anniversary is almost upon you, and there will be a seminar held in the coming days where obviously you along with others will share a panel and discuss these issues at large. How are you feeling as that time comes up? Have you any sort of anxious feelings, or how do you hope that evening would go?
I suppose in some ways, whilst I know it's planned and we're working towards it, I haven't allowed my mind to really function much on it. I have some notes made and thing, and I suppose I'm hoping that and praying that we're able to fill the hall. You know, that is my hope, you know, in one way. And I suppose it won't be until maybe the evening in question that all of those emotions will flood again, you know, just as if it was only yesterday, you know, because in as much as you get on and you live your life, you know, the trauma of the past is still there, you know, and the lack of no justice and no real will for political justice, you know, justice even from politics. The good side is the thing as well. So, yeah, I'm hoping that there's a good number, and I'm hoping that it's an opportunity for, you know, for those to hear and others to share their experiences, but also to look at where we go from here. How do we promote the truth, and how do we counter the narrative that's been done? And that's not just down to SAF or down to individuals like myself and others. It's down to every individual, every person, church leader, every individual needs to counter the narrative and say, no, that's not right, that's all lies. And, you know, and that needs to be done, because the more the world and our society accepts the lie, then they believe it is the truth when it's far from it.
Oh, look at it. I could just say that your daddy, to think that he could be this close in terms of distance whenever he was working at his thing, and I'm quite sure that if he saw who you've grown into today in terms of faith and everything that you stand for and standing by what the integrity of the life that he lived, it would make him very proud. So you should know that as well, that as difficult as those years have been, you've turned out well.
They have been challenging, there's no doubt. I suppose I spent time, as the man says, in the wilderness for a while, as anyone else. And I suppose it was Dad who planted the seed of the ministry way back when I was 13 or 14, I suppose. And that seed stuck, you know. It took me a while to get there.